Greetings and welcome to another installment of Quant Slob, the second in our foundational series, this time around, motivation. This is a fair heads up. This is not going to be some attempt to pump everybody up, fire everybody up about learning stats, but rather to simply offer some thoughts about why increasing your stats wisdom can add value and some musings and thoughts about how to go about it. Statistics, I think most everybody knows, is one of the fastest growing professions. In fact, that there are plenty of statistics available out there describing just how fast growing profession statistics is. Many of them, of course, prepared by statisticians. Scientific disciplines such as medicine, physics, astronomy, to be sure, have long used statistics. But nowadays, stats is seen as indispensable in just about every discipline, every line of business, every line of commerce. Retailers hire statisticians to figure out optimal inventory strategies, how to ideally place assets on their web pages. Websites themselves hire statisticians to figure out who or what is visiting their web pages. Business sales teams hire statisticians to figure out how to maximize customer satisfaction, and the list goes on and on and on. So, I mean, is this popularity hype? Is it a fad? Is it like a real thing? Well, I'm skeptical as anybody. I think that just about every facet of the modern world comes with some measure of hype, but the popularity of statistics is absolutely no accident, and for a very simple reason. Statistics offers a window into truth. The art of statistics allows a researcher to learn features of people that they've never met, places they've never been, products that they've never used, events that have not yet happened. And this is an incredibly powerful, valuable, and desirable skill. And I'm just going to put this on the table. Learning stats should never be feared. First, to be candid, there are much more important things in life, I think, worthy of our emotional energy. But the other to the point is that everybody has scientific reasoning wired into them. We're sort of pre-built with scientific reasoning. For example, if you were to go to your refrigerator and pull out some moldy cottage cheese, you would discard that moldy cottage cheese and go to the store and get some fresh cottage cheese, if there is such a thing as fresh cottage cheese. But how did you know to do that? Well, it's because at some point in the past, maybe when you were very young, you made the mistake of eating something moldy and you got sick, or you saw somebody do that, or somebody just communicated that to you. Your best friend, for another example, is not your best friend by chance. It's because you've learned that when you're hanging out together, you have a good time. And maybe when you do argue, you gain insights and you grow and mature as a person. And believe it or not, this is the very essence of statistical reasoning. In statistical reasoning, you make observations about the world around you, and you use those observations to draw conclusions about how the world works. Now, modern statistics, of course, has very much formalized the process in which we gather and think about our experiences and observations. But in concept, it's all the same thing. Another thing I want to put out on the table there is don't be afraid to think. There's a great story recounted by Richard Feynman, one of the greatest physicists of all time, from his youth, where he was interested in electronic circuits. And so one day his neighbor learned about this and had a malfunctioning radio and asked young Feynman if he could stop by and figure out what was wrong with it. And so after observing the behavior of the malfunctioning radio, Feynman started pacing. And his neighbor says, "Hey, what are you doing?" And Feynman says, "I'm thinking." And didn't take long. He sort of figured out what might be the problem with the radio. He took it apart, switched a couple of the amplifier tubes, and lo and behold, the radio started working properly. And his neighbor just marveled at this and proclaimed to his colleagues and friends and other neighbors that, hey, this Feynman kid fixes radios by thinking. This is, I think, a great anecdote, but it also tells a long and deep story about culture. And we talked a little bit about this in the last edition when we talked about strategy. Nowadays, in school and work, everything is about process, and you don't really have time to think. And I can imagine in many workplaces, what would happen if your boss came by and asked what you were doing and you said, I'm guessing this might get a somewhat negative response. And one last thing, I cannot tell you how many times I've heard students use the excuse when they're struggling with stats that they struggle with math. Well, guess what? Everybody struggles with math. It is true that some people at some point in time may know more mathematical concepts and techniques than others, but even the greatest scientists and mathematicians struggle with math. So if you use the excuse that you struggle with math, I'm completely unimpressed, to be frank with you. All you're telling me is that you're just like everybody else. That is going to do it this time around. Thank you so very much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And don't forget to stay tuned for more QuantSlob.